All right. So the equal access training series that Homebase is offering this year consists of 3 sessions. So we had our first one on January 15th, kind of going over the equal access rule and effectively supporting LGBTQIA plus clients, providing a general rule of the equal access or general overview of the equal access rule and how that applies to your programs and the work that you're doing. Today is our Equal Access and Cultural Competency Speakers panel led by the LGBTQ youth space. We're very excited to have them and sort of have them share their experiences and answer y'all's questions. And then February 27th, Homebase is planning on hosting a longer, more in-depth sexual orientation and gender identity and expression or SOGI training. So if folks attended that first training or you hear something during today's training and you're like, I want to learn more about that, we definitely recommend you going to that training on February 27th, checking it out and learning more. So that's sort of our equal access offerings this year within the next few weeks. And for a quick icebreaker, I'm going to actually have, everybody go in the chat. So if you all can put your name, organization, and just share how you practice self and collective care, that would be great. And then I will go since I'm off mute. Joy, she, they pronouns. I am with Homebase and I've been doing a lot of box breathing lately. So it's where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold, exhale, and then hold for another 4 seconds. It's been pretty relaxing and I have been enjoying collective care with my dance and movement community. So that's been bringing me a lot of joy lately. I will put that into the chat. And I see a lot of folks are already putting their answers in. So thanks and welcome. Excited to have you all here today. All right. And just to go a little bit into what we've already covered as part of our training series, the main objective of the part 1 of our equal access training offerings was to sort of give folks a working understanding of how the equal access rule applies to HUD-funded programs and just general best practices around following that rule. Also establishing some shared language for understanding key terms and identities relating to gender and sexuality. So those were the main learning objectives and the main points of information that were offered in the first part of that training. So some key terms and definitions, I'm sure that will also come up today and also be previewed in our SOGI training, will be sex assigned at birth, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. So sex assigned at birth, we understand as it's often assigned at birth based on the doctor's interpretation of the appearance of external anatomy. And the doctor will look at a baby and generally classify them as male or female. Biologically, though, it can be defined through a combination of bodily characteristics such as chromosomes, hormones, internal and external reproductive organs, and secondary sex characteristics. Gender identity is an internal and deeply held sense of gender. It can be the same as sex assigned at birth, which we would consider cisgender, or different, and related to gender expression, but it can be different to how an individual is expressing themselves to like the world. And gender expression includes external manifestations of gender expressed through a person's name, pronouns, clothing, haircut, behavior, voice, and or body characteristics. And it can be like typically carrying connotations of masculine or feminine, androgynous. It can change over time and be very fluid. It can also vary culturally. And sexual orientation describes a person's physical, romantic, and or emotional attraction to another person. Gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same. So we can think of these concepts on the screen and identities on the screen as 4 separate categories. They're very distinct from each other and separate. So, and then also transgender people may be straight, lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer. So that's another point of how gender identity doesn't necessarily equate or influence sexual orientation, right? Those are two different separately held parts of someone's identity and how they move throughout the world. So we just wanted to give that short overview of these key terms and definitions before we get into the content of our panel today. And also just to provide like a little blurb on the equal access rule. This rule was developed in 2016 and basically ensures that shelter housing services are provided to people in accordance with their gender identity. So we can remember from the last slide that that is someone's deeply held sense of their gender, and people should be provided services regardless of their gender identity, sex assigned at birth, gender expression, all of those things. The equal access rule also mandates that programs not require any sort of identification for individuals to prove gender identity, and requires providers to update their policies and procedures to ensure that they're reflecting requirements of this rule. Basically, guaranteeing access and not limiting folks to housing or services or opportunities based on their individual gender identity or how that's perceived by another person. This rule applies to all recipients and subrecipients of HUD funding, including all CPD programs, folks who are administering those said programs and services, people who are providing shelter and access to housing, must all sort of take guidance and align with this rule. As I said before, there's like a bunch more information available in our initial equal access training. And then for our third part of this training series, we'll be delving a little bit more deeply into the SOGI concepts that I went over. So if you're interested in either of those, please feel free to reach out to Sadaka and I. We can share the materials from the previous training and also give you the link to register for the next trainings as well. Great. So with that, I will pass it off to Justin for our panel. Justin?
Thanks, Joy. Hi, everyone. We are so excited to be here to add hopefully a meaningful conversation to the training that y'all have had thus far. Joy already introduced me, but my name is Justin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the program coordinator for our Speakers Bureau, which is our volunteer program with the LGBTQ plus youth space. If you're not familiar with the youth space, I'll give you a little bit of a debrief first, just so that you have kind of an idea of who we are, where we're coming from, and what it is that we do. So we are based in San Jose, although we serve all of Santa Clara County. And the youth space focuses on serving LGBTQ youth and their allies ages 13 to 25 years old. And we have a drop-in center here housed in San Jose. We just opened our new location actually in December off of Zinker Road. So if you have any participants or you would like to come to check out the space yourself, I invite you to do so. But we offer a ton of great different services here. We offer interactive workshops for our youth. We offer volunteer opportunities, kind of like what we will be doing with our Speakers Bureau today. We have mental health services, and essentially the youth space is just a great place to build community for youth and their allies alike. Like I mentioned, our youth space is Speakers Bureau, is a volunteer program of the youth space. And what the Speakers Bureau is we are a group of LGBTQ plus volunteers who share our stories and answer questions, of course, with the goal of fostering connection, raising awareness, and of course, educating audiences like yourselves about LGBTQ plus identities and lived experiences. Our main goal, of course, is that we hope that you'll continue these conversations that we have long after the panel concludes today. But before I get into the main stars of today's show and I introduce our amazing panelists for the day, I just have a few ground rules to share, and I have a list here, so I'll just make sure that I go over all of them, just to make sure that we're creating a safe space and making sure that the conversation is as meaningful as possible. I want to preface this by saying that there's no such thing as a bad question. If you have any curiosities, if you maybe have any hesitations about any of the language you're using, we will use this opportunity to course correct in the moment. And we're really just here to have that conversation and hopefully offer that education for you. But what this is going to look like is I will hand it over to our panelists in just a moment, and each of our panelists will introduce themselves for a few minutes, They'll tell you a little bit about their identities, their lived experiences, and any relevant information that they think could apply to the panel. And then once each of our four panelists do that, we'll open up the space for Q&A. And feel free to unmute yourselves. Feel free to go in the chat. We'll try to filter and get to all the questions as much as we can. But before we get into questions, please save your questions towards the end of each of our panelists' stories. Feel free to jot them down. We'll get to them when we can, but we want to make sure that we're having our panelists introduce themselves first, just so that you're able to catch any details that they answer before we get into the Q&A. And of course, we're not ambassadors for the entire LGBTQ plus community. We're just here to simply share our own stories and our own experiences. And our panelists will let you know if there's anything that they don't feel comfortable speaking about in the end of their bios before we get into questions. But with that being said, this is a safe space for learning. So we accept any and all questions. Like I mentioned, if you have any fun questions, any questions about the SOGI training that you would take a part of, anything about equal access, we're happy to answer them. But I will stop my yapping and hand it over to our great panelists for today. So in the speaking order and the order that they'll be introducing themselves, I have Shreya, I have Naomi, I have Wyckoff, and I have Jason with us today. So Shreya, if you're ready, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Justin. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Shreya, and I am a 24-year-old Indian American queer woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. And I grew up in San Jose and the Santa Clara County, and I attended school down in Los Angeles. And a lot of my lived experience being queer, I grew up in a Hindu and pretty traditional Indian family. And a lot of navigating my identity was coupled with navigating my cultural identity because, while they never explicitly had any rules about, being queer, um, heterosexuality was definitely strongly encouraged. And I've been raised with the expectation of having an arranged marriage from a pretty young age. So I wasn't really, even though I knew my queer identity when I was, much younger, I kind of had to think about, being open with certain people, and then I was able to explore that a little bit more while I was on my own in college. And another part of what I do for work is I work as a medical assistant, and I've done a lot of work in hospitals with social workers and kind of providing social services to people. So, as you were introducing yourselves in the chat, I was able to, recognize very similar organizations in terms of navigating housing, navigating legal aid, and things like that. And I hope to be able to provide kind of the perspective of intersectionality when we're thinking about queer folks that are coming from different cultural identities, and maybe whether or not they're able to have support from their family or who exactly they're able to get support from. And then also maybe some of how that interacts with seeking aid from some of these different organizations, or even like behavioral or medical services. And
Thanks,
I'll pass it
Shreya.
off to, yeah.
We'll pass it over to Naomi next.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. So my name is Naomi Castajon Wong. I am 30 years old. I go by she, her pronouns, and I identify as a transgender woman. I began my transition at around 18 years old. I moved away to London after high school, so I was able to kind of get away from my family and everybody that knew me here back in the Santa Clara County, because that's also where I grew up. And I was able to go and distance myself and start over really without the pressures of, family, friends, people who had preconceived ideas of me. So I was able to really figure out who I was. I ended up finishing my fashion program, came back to the States, and that's when I really had to open up to my family and let them know about the route that I was going to be taking. It definitely was a little bit tumultuous. I would say that there was about 6 months to a year where there really wasn't a ton of contact between me and my family. Luckily, at the time, I had my partner, and he's someone that has been a huge force in my life and has provided housing and safe places for me to stay, and has really opened his arms to me and was a huge factor in my transition and helping me medically as well. After I came out, I started my medical journey. I went ahead and sort of recloseted myself once I did come out as trans. I did my very best to sort of transition medically, look as quote unquote passable as possible in order to sort of keep myself safe. And I really didn't disclose my transness to people. I just wanted to try to live as much of my life sort of in stealth as possible, just to, again, for safety reasons. And that is a huge privilege, especially in the trans community, to be able to sort of live your life that way, because not a lot of trans women do get those options. And, the moment they come out, they are clocked, and it's something that they have to deal with in their day-to-day life, which can be really stressful. Obviously, I decided to just get a job as a nurse, try to be as, keep my head down as possible, just have a normal life, get married, work a 9 to 5. And I just ended up developing so much internalized shame around my transness and who I was, that I realized I just had to put myself out there and own who I was. And I decided to start modeling and do pageantry in order to help create representation in the media world. And I just competed in a pageant in December. And my next goal is to try to be the first trans Miss California. So yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks, Naomi. We will hand it over to Wyckoff for our next introduction.
Hi friends, I'm Wyckoff, and I use they them pronouns, and I'm 17. I am a queer agender individual who falls under the AROACE umbrella, which is a lot of words, but that's okay. Working backwards from that, basically AROACE is I don't really experience, my interpretation of AROACE is that I don't really experience sex or gender gender attraction. What am I saying? Romantic attraction. Though I do have a queer platonic partner who is also AROACE, meaning that we have a really deep friendship to the point of where we're like, okay, this is basically like we're dating. So we act like we're dating. So we should basically be dating. I am agender, which basically I don't experience a connection to the feeling of gender, which I don't feel like a third or I don't feel in between. I just feel nothing. So that's cool. And I use the label of queer specifically, because labeling myself as an agender person with like an orientation is difficult for me because sexuality and is so fluid for me. And also I like to use queer because it reminds me of my past as I live in since I'm still 17, I still live with my parents, and I live in a very like conservative Republican household, very like anti-vax, very conspiracy theorist. So I was growing up called a lot of slurs, and still I am growing up and I'm still called a lot of slurs, but it's better to say it myself and have it in my own mouth, telling other people, hey, I'm queer, instead of someone pointing at me and saying, you're queer, because no one wants to experience that. Basically, for a little background on me, my mom is a really like rough and tumble woman. She was in the Air Force. So I kind of got a lot of that in my upbringing, a lot of like, make your bed like this, and a lot of, and my dad was early diagnosed with autism and ADHD growing up, but since he lived a lot on welfare, he wasn't able to get the support he needed. So we all kind of grew up and I grew up in the house with him, and we never really had the correct like regulation for our emotions. My grandma, who took care of me until she passed away in 2016, was a lesbian and was really into the queer community. Her brother, Tom, actually passed away from complications with AIDS, which sparked my grandma to like really get into pride and supporting people. And in that, she realized she was a lesbian. And I didn't know she was any kind of queer until like 2 or 3 years after she passed, because it was such a like, we can't tell the child her grandmother is trans, or not trans. What am I saying? A lesbian, queer. But yeah, I grew up very pushed away from the queer community. So I knew I was different really early on in my life, but I didn't exactly know how, and I didn't exactly know why it was bad. And it wasn't bad, but everyone treated me differently and I didn't understand why. And it was because I like girls, and also because I was just like that. And I wanted to be who I was, and no one wanted to let me do that. But basically, I've since I realized I was queer around the 6th grade, I've been really active in school clubs like queer student unions and GSAs. It was very, very secret up until my freshman year when one of my friends, not anymore, outed me to my parents. And my parents tried to kick me out of my house, and they weren't very effective at that. They were just kind of like, get out. And I was like, no. And they were like, okay, I guess you can stay here. So it ended up just being a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. Like, I'm currently taking this at my mom's work. And she's like, okay, as long as I don't know what you're doing, just go do it over there and I don't have to see it, which is great for me. But it also, I have a great deal of experience with parents who just don't really want to know me that well, I guess. But yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Wyckoff. All right, we will hand it over to our last panelist, Jason, to give an introduction.
Hi, my name is Jason, and I'm the oldest here, I'm pretty sure. I'm 54. I go by he, him. I'm a queer person, and I use queer because I'm just attracted to who I'm attracted to. There are other words for this, but I think Wyckoff kind of alluded to the whole like labeling things is kind of problematic. And Shreya, you also mentioned the intersectionality. So there's just a lot to discuss and a lot to unpack with all of this. So I'm really happy to be here and help in any way I can. I am from the South. I was born and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina. I was born in 1970, just due to the math. And I grew up in that environment. And I had a gay uncle, and I didn't know he was gay because you don't want to tell the kids about that sort of thing. But until much later, he actually came out, even though everybody knew he was gay, besides me. He came out at his mom's funeral, and I thought it was the most courageous thing I'd ever seen. And in fact, it was really surprising that my ultra conservative brother-in-law came up to him at the end of that, and he said, honestly, that was one of the most courageous things he'd ever seen. So I was like, okay, people can seem one way on the surface. For example, I look like this, and I also look like this. We all have different facets of our personalities and our lives. We don't know what's going on with each other. So my hope is that as you come out of this and continue to go through your careers, especially now, just try to cultivate your empathy as much as possible, no matter who you're dealing with. And yeah, I'm just happy to be here and answer any questions y'all might have. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason, and thank you to all of our panelists for your introductions. The time has come now for us to open up the space for Q&A. So like I mentioned, how this will work is we encourage you to either throw some questions in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourselves and we could have a very fluid, fun conversation. But I do want to encourage you that, again, that there's no such thing as a bad question here. If you have any questions about any of the identities that our panelists mentioned, anything related to any of the trainings that you participated in this far, or just any questions about lived experiences in general, any of the panelists who feel that they can relate to the question, we open up the space for them to answer and give it a go. But yes, feel free to start throwing in those questions. We're excited to have this conversation with y'all.
Hello. I have a question
Sure.
for everybody. I hope this is okay to ask us. It seems like a good opportunity. I'm a disaster volunteer. I sometimes work with the Red Cross. We have a collaboration of service providers for disaster preparation and relief, and it's called Cadre. One of our main goals is making sure that everybody is included in disaster relief and that there's nobody that feels uncomfortable or resistant to coming to an emergency shelter or service center because they're not sure how they'll be treated or welcomed. And we want to make sure that everybody knows that disaster relief is for everybody that was affected by the disaster. And we really don't care, but we also feel an obligation to try to understand the needs of all the diversity in Santa Clara County, the ethnic communities, the spirit, and the religious groups, so that we can, if as much as possible, make our services comfortable for them and not inadvertently do something that makes it, you know, feel like they can't be there because it goes against their religion or something like that. So we just need to, but for that we need to understand exactly what is the feelings of the group. And so one of the things we've been discussing is when we open an emergency shelter, um, how do we do the bathrooms and changing areas and things like that that would feel safe for everybody to go in. And I mean everybody that is, trans or queer or whatever they are, and also the people that feel uncomfortable around that. How can we make it so that everybody, I mean, because we really want everybody to be comfortable if we can arrange that. If we can't, we just have to let it be and try to make sure that everybody is just safe. But we would like them to be more than safe. We would like them to be comfortable and welcome. So does anybody have any input on that for me?
I have some input that I can share on how we make the space comfortable here at the U Space, but I'd love to open it up to our panelists first, and then I'm more than happy to share another option if our panelists don't touch on it. But do either of y'all want to add anything about maybe your own experiences with what Francie mentioned, or have any maybe suggestions that you think could work?
Uh, I have one thing. So with and I'm hesitant because I'm not outwardly trans, but I there's a place here in San Jose, not far from my house, um, called the Art Boutique. It's great. It's comic books up front and music in the back. I play there from time to time, and their bathrooms are genderless. It's like a bathroom on an airplane. But the thing that I like about it is the sign out front says basically it just says whatever, just wash your hands. Now that's it. I thought it was great, but it's hard for me to. I mean, you can hear me hesitating because I don't want to speak for the trans folks in the room, but I think as I think starting with this is an agendered space and anybody can use this and feel safe. I think having a lock on the door is good, probably. I think really though, whatever it is, you want to just make sure that again, practice empathy. What if you were that person and you were the only person everybody's staring at and everybody and you're like feeling weird and out there? What might make you feel more comfortable? That's it for me.
Oh, thank you. The issue is if there were individual bathrooms, of course, there would be no problem at all. We would just do whatever, just wash your hands would be perfect. But it's group bathrooms because in a shelter, we're using a school or a public,
Yeah.
a community resource center. So everybody has to share the same one. And often there's only two group bathrooms for men and women. And there's been discussion of having a time when other people could go in, or I mean, all of these things just seem so like a lot of people may not want to be identified. I mean, they don't want to be special. They want to just use the
Right.
bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
exactly.
we don't have to have, and they don't want to wait till 5 o'clock when it's their turn.
Yeah, good
I
Lord.
mean, it's been so many discussions. People have good intentions on this.
Yeah.
They want to do it. It's just that we can't figure out how to do it without insulting or embarrassing or further stressing anybody. Um, so help.
Wyckoff, I saw your hand if you want to add some perspective.
Yeah, this is actually a really awesome question because I know that my high school is currently dealing with the same kind of thing. My high school actually just took away the gender X or genderless bathroom because they're like, okay, people are going in there to do things that aren't using the bathroom. So it's one of those, what my high school has done so far, which might work, is there's most of the time if you're using a school area, there's multiple bathrooms or there's multiple sets of 2 bathrooms. Like there's a male bathroom, there's a female bathroom, and then there can be like a single seater, or there can be just a normally I found that high schools and middle schools often convert like the female bathrooms into genderless bathrooms or like all gender bathrooms. I'd say that it's helpful because everyone has a place to use the bathroom and everyone has a place to change. I know that especially with high school PE, which is definitely different than what you're talking about, but it kind of is similar. With high school PE, they have trans students change in a separate area, or like it's normally a single seater or just an empty room that is set up as like, okay, this is where you change if you don't identify as either of these things, or if you feel that if you just don't feel comfortable changing in the gendered rooms.
Yeah.
But that might not work, but if it does, that's what has worked, and the trans and queer community at my school enjoys it and likes it, but I know it's probably different for adults.
I think that the one of the issues in disaster is you don't know what facility you're going to have for a shelter, and it's often decided really quickly. Although we have a list of identified places, and I think that one thing we could add to that list is whether or not there's a third bathroom, which would make it easy. But if there isn't, then there's just the issue. We just ignore the whole thing and leave people to work it out on their own, which is how it is basically now. Or we try to jump into it and open ourselves to criticism. And, I mean, there's a lot of sensitivity in the organization. We're trying to be sensitive to the people, but the organizations also have their feelings. So, and even going here is often, you know, angering to some people. So especially not in California. If you're doing disasters in the South, which I've been all over the country, it's very different there. And in some places, it's even against the law to, address some of these issues. So the Red Cross is always trying to work within the framework of the law. It's getting harder and harder with immigrant issues, and it's just hard to stay good. But this is really helpful. Does anybody else have anything?
Naomi or Shreya, would you like to add anything? I do have something that I could share with the youth space, but I want to open up for y'all first.
Yeah. I think in terms of, it might not necessarily be like a for sure solution, but if there's an option to possibly have separate spaces in terms of, one is just for utilizing restroom in terms of like going to the bathroom, taking care of your needs, washing your hands, and then leaving, and then potentially having like a separate space that's only for changing. And that would have maybe like you could separate or like create even just like draped sheets, like just to create little like spaces for people where they know, okay, this is the changing area, almost like you make little fitting rooms for people. I think at the end of the day, if you're approaching it from like a disaster perspective, I think everyone that's probably attending is in a space of needing help or assistance. And I honestly don't believe that unless someone's going in there as truly a bad seed, which then at that point, that person just needs to be addressed individually. I think for the most part, people are just going in there to get help, and they're just seeking refuge and they're seeking a safe space. For someone like me, obviously you wouldn't know if I was using the women's space. There wouldn't necessarily be any identifiable factors. So you also can't necessarily go into it like predetermining who you think is trans and who isn't, because then you get into like a really sticky situation of trying to like out people.
No, we would never try to assign people to a bathroom.
Right. Yeah.
Based on who we thought they were,
Yeah.
I mean, that would be strange.
Yeah.
But
So
that's a good idea.
spaces.
And we've discussed that also for, things like Muslim women who need extra privacy and things like that. I think the shelter managers, we've met with them a few times and they have been open to trying to add into their protocol. See, this is the important thing, is that we just get it into the protocols that if it's possible, we mark off a place for special changing, or a ladies and children's area only, or, a gender-free bathroom. Those things should just be in our training. And
Right.
then it has a better chance of happening. But if it's just like, oh, if you can do this, do it. And I mean, in an emergency, people are just going to be going down the checklist. They're just going to be setting up the shelter as fast as they can, and they're not going to be including extra frills. But these are not really extra frills to some
Right.
people. And so we're trying to get it into the baseline of disaster sheltering. So this is great. This is very helpful.
Yeah.
If anybody is interested in disaster volunteering, please contact me. And we would love to have direct input instead of me having to come to a meeting like this, because we don't really have a lot of participation from some populations. I'll put
Yeah,
my contact information in the chat, and
Yeah.
you could just
Yeah, that would
email
be
me.
great, Francie. Thank you. Shreya, I saw you on mute. Did you want to add a piece to this question before we go to the next one?
Sure. I was just gonna say maybe throw something in there that it's like if people want extra accommodations for whatever reason, whether it's like cultural or whether it's like for their gender identity, etc., just like have a place where you could direct their concerns. I'm sure you guys have already, put this into place, but just that way, I think also with disaster prep, you're never going to be able to plan everything out or know exactly who is going to be in which, rescue area. And if there is any, leniency to sort of customize that to the individuals that are there. Um, of course, like after they've, done whatever they need to do and set up the basics, um, just like something that would be able to go in and maybe work towards some of those concerns that maybe don't benefit like every single person, or like are not important for every single person, but like would help those people feel much safer. Because I'm sure there are queer and trans folks that would just, choose one of the male or female bathrooms and, go in there. So I think it definitely would be a case by case basis. Or, in my college, another thing that people have done is it was a building with multiple floors. And so they just had the bathrooms on one floor be like genderless bathrooms. And then all of the other floors were just, the regular male and female. So if people wanted to, go to that particular floor, they could do that. And then, there were a lot of just like non-queer or non-trans folks that would also use the genderless bathroom. And I think it was like they kind of worked out a system where it's not going to be a bunch of people crowding in or anything. Like if they felt like somebody, like people kind of gave each other their privacy without there being rules anyways. Or I've even seen like the handicap stalls being used as like a genderless space, but I guess that just depends on whether people feel comfortable with the person walking into the bathroom. Or I guess that would also depend on your greater environment and things like that.
I think, yeah, I mean, once we established how it would be, I think we would have to explain to the shelter residents that this is how, that there may be somebody walking through or something, so that they don't feel like anything's wrong. But I also want to say that, I mean, every shelter is, if possible, is supposed to have a nurse, a resident nurse, 24 hours a day. And I think people should be free to go and say anything they want to the nurse if they have a special need or something. But I'm just realizing, I mean, a lot of this would be educating your own community about this, that they should just go, because otherwise they won't even get to the shelter to use the bathroom. They just won't go, and possibly not be as safe as they could in an emergency. So if, as much as we could, in using the groups that, like yourselves, that talk to people and have some kind of community input, to just let them know that we're working on this and that they should feel free to come and they should share their needs with us, and we will do our very best to accommodate. That would go a long way, because like especially in the immigrant community, I'm telling people, I mean, it doesn't matter how how much we try to accommodate them once they get to the shelter if they never go to the shelter. So that would be on you guys, and we would be happy to help you and do any kind of training or discussion that would be make it more comfortable and make a better connection between the emergency responders and your community.
Yeah. Thank you, Francie. I think that's a great question to get us started. And I think each of our panelists added such great perspective and hopefully some good options that you'll be able to implement. I do want to bring attention to the chat because Jason threw in a great suggestion that we use ourselves, or we used to use ourselves with our old previous space. So I'll just read what Jason shared here. It says you might also want to consider having folks who are willing to hold the bathroom space for a short time while someone needs privacy. And essentially this kind of relates to the old space that we had for our own programming. We shared a building with our mental health services unit. So we had two group bathrooms, one was, they were both gendered. And essentially what we did is we kind of makeshift converted each one into just single-use restrooms so that only one person could go in at a time. And this just eliminated, all of those in conversations, is it a gendered bathroom? Are we accommodating folks who might need privacy based on religion or anything like that? So I think Jason threw in a great suggestion there is, if you have the ability to convert each group restroom into, just a private restroom just for a few moments where everyone's able to accommodate themselves however they need to, it kind of, covers everyone across the base and allows everyone the privacy that they need. So I'm glad that you asked that because I think that's a great question. And I think each of our panelists added such great perspectives to it. But I did see also another question in the chat from Elizabeth. And they asked, working with someone who said a homophobic comment, will I get in trouble for putting up a pride flag in the office in San Jose? Also have CTs who said homophobic comments. I think I might be able to speak for most of our panelists here, but I think if getting in trouble for putting up a pride flag, I think it really depends on the policy with your own organization. I mean, I do not think that anything like that exists in the Bay Area, let alone California. I'm hoping not. However, I'm wondering if I can open up this question to our panelists and see their perspectives on how maybe you could advise Elizabeth on how to handle or support folks that, may be experiencing comments like this in a workplace.
I can talk on this like just a little bit because I know that I have a desk here at my office, and I have one of those like mini pride flags that are like just about this tall, and then it's like this big, and you just can put it in a pencil thing. And I have had coworkers, they're gone now, not for related reasons, but who have made homophobic comments or who seem like they're generally uncomfortable with seeing rainbows in the office. But if they're making like homophobic comments, it, I mean, I've never gotten in trouble for having my little tiny pride flag at my desk because I feel like anyone who wants to like kick up that much of a fuss about it is just like why? But it's possible that you might experience interpersonal disputes if you put it up. But again, really, as Justin said, it's based on like the vibes of your organization, based on policies. And I'd assume there aren't any like don't put up pride flags policies at like work. But if you mean trouble as in like weird looks, maybe. But honestly, like being prideful and proud of who you are, sometimes it just balances out with like okay, people are looking at me odd, but hey, I have my little pride flag that I can look at and I like it. And sometimes it balances out. So really depends. Yeah, basically what Justin said.
Thanks, Wyckoff. Naomi, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, I think in terms of what Justin said, if your organization doesn't necessarily have any policies or restrictions around it, I would definitely have that still be put up because what I'm sure they have policies about are harassment. And you putting up a pride flag, as long as you're not going against any sort of like rules or regulations, you're completely in your jurisdiction to do so. But what they are not allowed to do is bully you, harass you, make you feel uncomfortable in a place of work. These are all things that are not legal. So if you wanted to then press the issue you now have your own issue that you can bring to your manager. So don't let yourself get steamrolled. Don't let yourself get walked on. I think, definitely always fight for yourself. If that's something that makes you feel comfortable in your workspace and you're not breaking any rules doing so, then definitely do it.
Beautifully said, Wyckoff and Naomi. I kind of have said it better
Thank
myself.
you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth, I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Shreya or Jason, did you want to add any perspective to that before we move on?
I mean, that was just perfectly put. I would also just caution everyone to not assume that these regulations or these policies don't exist in companies and especially small businesses, especially outside the Bay Area. But even here within the Bay Area, it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask. And we all feel that. But yeah, super, super great answer, Naomi.
Yeah. And I know that this is a great question too, especially with a lot of the legislation that we're, currently experiencing. So I encourage you, resistance is power. But Shreya, I saw you unmute, so I'm wondering if you want to add anything to this.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, if you're worried about like the coworker or like someone who made the comment to you, I think if they directly question you about it as well, like you never have to feel like putting up a pride flag outs you. Like you can always say, I'm an ally, or I'm putting this up to signal to other people of the, LGBTQ plus community that they can come here and get services. And same thing with like clients or people who are making these comments. Like I think it is sometimes hard to call those things out in the moment because especially when you're working with people, I mean, even like my own parents, like I'm just recognizing they're growing up in such a different, condition where like they didn't know people in this community. They didn't have any, like all they kind of knew were stereotypes and they didn't really interact with people in that community. And so it is hard to kind of dismantle all of that in a conversation and take on that work. But I think in terms of just having that symbol there, I think it can be really helpful to even signal to people who are making those comments like this is actually a safe space or this is like a place where we're thinking about this community. And so we don't want you to, make assumptions like that or things like that. And even I've seen like online or other things, like sometimes people who are making these comments like don't even necessarily have like harm towards people in the community. Like sometimes it is ignorance, sometimes it's like trying to be, like with young people, it's like kind of coming back to be like gay as an insult, I feel, which I thought we got over that. But um, all of these like different things that are kind of happening at the same time. I mean, not to say that those people were not being homophobic. Like I'm sure that really, you felt that deeply to even, notice this pattern and bring that up. But I would definitely put it up. I think even if you receive a little bit of judgment for it, like I think you can always like don't ever feel bad about using like, oh yeah, it's here for work or it's here because um I went to this training and they said to put it up or I got it for free or whatever. Like you don't have to become personally involved or justify yourself to anybody else in that process. And you should be able to feel safe having it up too.
Absolutely. Great advice, I think, from all of our panelists across the board. And I know speaking for myself, even though, seeing a pride flag can be just a small symbol, I know that it always helps me feel like it's a safe space when I'm seeking services, as a person in the community. So just like Shreya mentioned, you don't really have to justify yourself for why you want to put it up there. I think it's powerful just to have that as a symbol. So that's a great question. And I also saw in the chat that Lauren threw in some legal resources for trans and non-binary worker rights in Spanish and with also legal aid at work. So thank you so much for throwing in those resources. I just wanted to bring attention to that because just like Naomi was mentioning, you have rights. So I'm glad that that's mentioned in there. Thank you so much. All right, thank you. So far, we've had questions from Elizabeth and Francie. I'd love to open the room up to anyone else who has any questions. We have about an hour together left, so I want to make sure that we're making this a great use of your time. Feel free to unmute yourself, throw them in the chat. I can read them if you need me to. Okay, perfect. We right on time. We got one. All right. From Aaron, we have a question that reads, what inclusive resource or space do y'all feel is missing from the county? I think this is a great question. It's a two-parter. The second part says, what is the most valuable resource or space you have seen or utilized? I think this is a great question. Anyone on the panel feel comfortable speaking to any inclusive resources that maybe you feel are missing or anything that you've utilized that you want to give a shout out to?
I can start off with this one. I am not super familiar with every single resource in Santa Clara County. To be honest, I'm probably more familiar with LA County, but um, I think that something that could possibly be missing might be just like an emergency fund that people could apply to, like whether that's for, you know, if you have a thing and you kind of aren't sure what department to go into, maybe just even a form that explains the situation that can help people know where they can, seek resources from if they aren't really sure where to go yet. Or even just like a space where they can put things that like maybe might have them outed if they kept those things at home. Like I was just pulling from when I was younger, where I was like, oh, I don't want to, take this pride flag home, or I don't want to, have this thing here, or like these clothes or whatever. And maybe something like a locker space or something like that, that might be helpful. Or even for people who maybe are experiencing like, maybe they don't have like regular housing, like having a place to put like, things where they're not worried about like carrying all of that with them. But yeah, I'll just start off with that and let the others fill in.
Naomi, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I think in terms of like for me and my own personal experience, because obviously I don't want to like talk about as a whole what I think the entire community would need, but I know that for me, kind of growing up and then going through my transition, I think it would have been great to have a space where, similar to what Shreya was saying, like places where you can keep belongings, but more so where like you can come in and maybe there's like clothes for you to try on or places for you to be able to sort of express your gender identity in a different way. I know that I didn't necessarily have access to like women's clothes, and I wasn't necessarily comfortable going and shopping for women's clothes when I was obviously early in my transition. So a place where I could have gone and like, maybe picked up a few little pieces, some basics, places where I could have like learned how to maybe do my glam, just things that would have, the physicality of transitioning is such a huge part of it that I think having a space where I could have sort of practiced that, been around other girls that maybe had already done it, or, like a trading program where you can bring clothes and swap. And I think that would have been a great resource, even for trans men or just anybody that's, gender expressive. I think just a space where you can go and, have that to try and see if it feels right for you.
Like the LGBTQ space.
Right.
Shameless plug, shameless plug. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Jason. Because just like Naomi mentioned, what's a really popular, at least one of the services that we have here at the youth spaces, we do have a clothing rack where youth can, come on and try gender affirming clothes. We have binders, we have gaffs, we have whatever access our youth need or anything that they need to, make themselves feel comfortable for outward expression. So thanks for the shout out, Jason. Wyckoff, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I have just a little something because Shreya, that's so real. Like, I'm also not very familiar with Santa Clara County resources, even though like I've lived here all my life. It's also like about being my age. It's really hard to so there are a lot of resources for kids that are like, oh, well, teens should be able to use this and teens should be able, but it's really hard to like get to those spaces. Like for me, I love the youth space. It's but it's 30 minutes away by car from my house. And the only reason I'm able to get there is because I drive myself and I'm allowed to have a car and I'm privileged with the car and gas and money to get places. But I've talked to so many kids who are like in the QSU club at my school and Queer Student Union, and all of them are like, well, can you take me? Can we like do a club, like going like a field trip? And I'm like, I'm so sorry, I don't have enough room in my car. But it's like there's so many resources that are awesome for kids, but it's just difficult to get them to the kids. So it would be really awesome if there could be outreach programs at schools, because yes, there are oftentimes like queer student unions and GSAs and stuff and sagas and stuff like that at schools, but those are also run by kids who probably don't have access to the same resources. So I know that in the Santa Clara County Office of Education, they're currently trying to bring together all of the Santa Clara County GSAs and stuff, but it doesn't really cover it if you're not like labeled like a GSA and you're an official affiliate. Apparently, at least that's what I've been hearing and talking about. But honestly, even with the inaccessibility, sometimes the inaccessibility of uh, items and resources for teens, definitely going to the second part of your question, the most valuable resource slash space I've seen or utilized has been my school's GSAs and QSUs, because it's just full of kids the same age who are also having the exact same problems. So I think that's really effective and great for especially kids to have. Yeah.
I just want to add a little piece to what Wyckoff shared. I think having access to the GSAs in schools is so significant because it is a place, a safe space where, youth can frequent daily. Because, there is that deficit where, youth might not be able to access somewhere like the youth space every day because of transportation needs and whatnot. But I'm glad that you mentioned that. But I also want to point out too that, I think our panelists sharing that they don't know, exactly what all the resources are really speaks to maybe a deficit that we do have in the community, where maybe, there could be room for us to, really outwardly promote those spaces that we do have, share those resources. And with that being said, I do want to point out some mentions in the chat. Tanya shared a great list of resources from the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, which we partner with regularly. And I think that that's a great place too, as well as the LGBTQ plus page on the SCOE, the Santa Clara County Office of Education page that Wyckoff just spoke about. And if anyone else needs clarification on what GSA means, I saw a question in the chat. Wyckoff, do you want to explain maybe a little debrief of what your GSA looks like?
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin. So basically, a GSA, as Elizabeth said in the chat, is a gay straight alliance. Most schools these days have pivoted to calling it a gender and sexuality alliance, or gender and some other S word sometimes. We also have sagas, which are sexuality and gender alliance. And then I think in my in my school district, we're the only queer student union, but it's because in our school, to get around certain things, we need to be a student union to do certain stuff that like GSAs can't do, and like get other fundings that are necessary to support the community on campus, especially since my school in the community in my district has the highest queer population, apparently. But yeah, basically a GSA or a QSU or Saga will essentially host maybe monthly, bi-monthly, maybe even weekly meetings of anyone can come, of any sexuality and any gender, anyone who goes to school there, of course, can come to the meetings. And basically, some GSAs are specifically about educating. So they'll do weekly presentations of like, this is the name for this word, and these are resources that are available to you, and this is how you can support the queer community. And some GSAs are just sitting around and being like, well, my day was bad because this bad thing happened to me, and we're all queer, so we can share this experience together. And sometimes it's like group therapy, sometimes it's like education, and sometimes it's planning cool events to promote queer existence on campus. But it's really variable depending on what your school has bandwidth to do, but they're really, really great for connecting with other queer students.
I also want to mention, or adding on to what Wyckoff said, that, having GSAs and spaces like this are really great ways to build that community. Some of our panelists here actually joined me at a panel that we held at a GSA at Silver Creek High School. And it went over really well. And we got lots of great feedback from the students. And we received lots of great feedback from the students that let us know that, having these lived experiences and having panels like we have here, and bringing those to the youth is really something significant. So if you or someone you know has a need or can identify something that maybe folks might want a similar panel like this, I will mention that all of our panels are free, and we're able to travel upon request if it's within the county, and we can also do virtual panels like this. But that's a great question. Thanks, Wyckoff, for following up on that. All right. We are ready for the next one.
Question.
Yes, Richmond, go for it.
Yeah, what I'm starting to see a lot of now, maybe it's just me. I'm not up to speed on a lot of things dealing with the LGBTQ community, but like people that I know are friends, just because they might have a opposite gender identity, people are not changing their names to fit that gender. For instance, like Jason Miller, Jason said he's not transgender. He just is him. So, but the question being is, moving forward in the next 5 years, say 5 to 10 years, as the LGBTQ community, do you guys like the point of really strategically putting transgender versus asexual versus trans identity, or do we want to get to a place where it's just like this? My name is Richmond Brock, and I'm whoever I want to be when I want to be. I don't have to change my name so to help you out. If I want to look like this today, I don't need to change. I can just be Richmond and Richmond in all its entirety. Or do you guys like the fact of how you guys are contextualizing everything and making sure everybody has their own niche person. If I think you guys understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Can I take this since I was mentioned first? It's a great question. I understand it, and I think, I mean, you're going to get the answer is. I mean, the snarky answer is we could check the gay agenda, or we don't have one. There isn't one. We're just people, and some of us really do embrace. Some of us may want to just say, "Hey, look, I'm a gay man. I'm male. I am attracted to cis males and only cis males, and other people will have a problem with that. And it's a complicated world. We have problems with people based on a lot of different facets of their personalities and, frankly, behaviors. Uh, it varies, Richmond, and we're binary thinkers. People are just because the world is chaos, the universe is chaos, and we struggle to make sense of it. So it's totally understandable that you'd want to get some sort of like way of orienting towards this. Unfortunately, from the perspective of getting clarity, I'm not giving you much, except to say that again, like I think if you just try to approach people as people and let them tell you what they like and what they don't like and how they want to be treated, and really coming at this again, I'm going to bang away on empathy. Like I'm going to assume you're a good person until you show me you're not. I think a really a good way to go about it. Just be respectful and open. That's my take.
I can add on to that if you'd like. I was listening to your question and it was absolutely beautiful. Like hearing like I am Richmond Brock and I am just who I am and I'm not going to change. I like that. And I feel that's like my personal opinion. I did change my name because my first name that I used was very effeminate. And I switched it because I was like, this is something my grandma used to call me. But it's like, it's one of those things where you're going to meet so many, again, as Jason said, you're going to meet so many different queer people who have so many different opinions. And there are some people who really love labels and some people who really hate labels. And there are all these people in between. And it really, really depends. And I mean, maybe we can walk forward and be like, okay, this is who I am. And this is what I'm going to be. And I'm not going to change. But some people, I mean, yeah, I wish there was a really concrete answer because I love when there are concrete answers, but there's not, sadly, in this. But I really like how you approach like it's fine, whatever happens. But yeah, it would be great. But yeah, cool.
Naomi, I saw your hand up next.
Yeah. I definitely feel like it's one of those things where, yes, I think it would be great if we lived in a world where we could simply be like, hey, I'm Naomi, like this is me, blah, blah, blah. A lot of that, though, and a lot of the reason why people I feel push back so hard with their identities and really want you to know who they are is because a lot of the times we're met with so much discrimination. And I think we're met with so many people that are constantly trying to shame us and shame our experiences that a lot of the times it comes from a place of fighting back to ensure that pride in yourself. I know that for me, I did live that life of just not letting people know and just kind of being like, hey, like I'm Naomi. People don't need to know that I'm trans. But when you hear all of the bigotry and the ignorance, and you realize that if you don't openly speak up and own that truth of being like, hey, you might not have realized, but I am a transgender woman, that allows people to realize, hey, there's actually trans individuals out there that I might not even know that they're trans, and I could be saying this stuff about people. And so I think that's why you get so many individuals that then come out and really affirm their identities, because it's a way to resist against the shame and the bigotry that we deal with. I think if people didn't meet us with so much of that, sure, we would be more comfortable just being like, yeah, this is who I am. And like on the side, I do hook up with the same sex gender, or oh, by the way, I am trans. If that was met with much more acceptance, I think that would be the response. But a lot of the times it's met with questions and ignorance and bigotry. And so, yeah, you get people that end up feeling they really have to stand in their truth. So, yeah.
Beautifully said, all of y'all so far. Shreya, did you want to add any perspective to this before we take the next question?
I think it's been covered. Yeah, you all did a wonderful job.
Thanks, y'all. Richmond, that was a really great question. Just like Wyckoff said, I think the way you asked it and worded it was very well said. So I really appreciate you giving us some leeway there to share our perspectives. And I also want to give a shout out in the chat. I see Chris is giving some great perspectives in there as well. So when you'll have a moment to check in on that, that would be great also. But yes, we're ready for the next question. Feel free to throw it in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself, we can have that conversation. All these questions have been great so far, by the way. I just want to say that I'm speaking for myself on behalf as a coordinator. I'm not supposed to really be a panelist today, but I just really appreciate all the questions that you'll have. So again, feel free to ask anything that piques your curiosity about anything that you've had discussed in training so far, anything that our panelists have mentioned related to their experiences, their identities, or if you just want follow up on anything we've spoken about so far, you really have the floor to ask us anything that you need to.
Maybe I have a question for the group, not the panelists. But I assume you're getting feedback, subjective, or maybe there's quantitative information from surveys or whatever. But what y'all are having this series of talks about this topic. What kind of feedback have y'all gotten around this issue just from running your services in general? I know that's a big, broad question, but like, are there specific issues that you maybe thought of when you were invited to attend this meeting? And I mean, because we're here for it.
Sadaka or Joy, I don't want to call you all out, but I wonder if you maybe have any perspective to what Jason just mentioned about maybe putting this series together, if there was any hesitation that you experienced or any feedback that you received, maybe the group could benefit from it.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say there's like hesitation. I think I would say there's been like the opposite. I think because it's a topic that people are interested in and people are seeing like everyday like impacts for folks that are like queer LGBTQIA plus coming into their shelters, coming into their programs, and just wanting to know more about kind of like what folks have been getting at so far, just like how to be more accessible to people, how to make sure that people know that there are like agencies and places that are willing to help. And a lot of times, like what I've found is like people aren't like being malicious or like malintended. Like the education is like really needed for folks to understand how to do that more effectively. Um, and I think it's really like enlightening and reassuring to me, at least like as a trainer, to see those sort of like learning moments and those light bulb moments, and like just what folks have had the courage to ask here today to our panel has been really awesome. So I definitely encourage folks to yeah, keep asking those questions, keep chatting. If there's anything that you want to know from Justin, Jason, Wyckoff, Shreya, Naomi, all of these folks are here to like engage in your learning and help you out. So yeah, if there's anything, burning questions, anything you've been wondering about, please feel free.
If I could just jump in about maybe like concerns that exist within the queer community. I think when seeking resources, I know that a lot of queer folks and trans folks are concerned about confidentiality, especially if they are minors or if they maybe live with their family, etc. Like if we're communicating, is there any mail that's going to come to the house? Like, especially since these are county resources, like, is this being communicated with the state? Is it being communicated, with the government, especially with the new political administration? I personally have seen, in other states, like trans youth being, put on a list, like from a doctor, for example, which I mean violates HIPAA, but even just, I think these concerns are real and valid because I think people are going to hesitate to engage with resources if they think it's going to harm them down the line in terms of, their employment or outing them to, people that they don't want to be outed to, or just putting them at increased risk for discrimination or anything like that. So I think that's one big concern. But the other thing that would be super awesome is I know that most, schools, like high schools, community colleges in the Bay Area usually do have programming that is for the LGBTQ plus community. And I know that they typically work with, nonprofits, but I'm sure they would also appreciate having, county resources that are, customized towards them, whether that's like showing up to those places and doing a training that's like customized to them. Like if you're, offering legal help, what conditions do I need to fall into to, qualify for this? What counts as discrimination, where I can maybe be able to get some legal help, or housing discrimination and things like that. So just being able to sort of put these resources out there in the queer community already, instead of sort of putting it on the individual to kind of go to these multiple organizations and do all of this work to kind of get help, would also be something that would, I'm sure, drastically increase, people actually using the resources and knowing what's out there. I kind of think about it almost similar to like scholarships, where people have to kind of go and find those things for themselves and apply versus like, knowing what's out there already. And I think, you know, even if that's having somebody on your team that's just dedicated to, reaching out via social media and like offering, a blurb of, hey, this is what we offer that's specifically for, the queer community, or like even just telling them like, you being queer does not really affect you being able to use its resource in terms of the, like disaster relief or like things like that. Like I think there is a lot of things that are very applicable, like the prescription medications being replaced. Like that is so useful to, have, and it's probably just things that we don't even know about and would love to disseminate within the community more. So yeah, that's just my little um, advice monologue.
Naomi, go for it.
Yeah, I did also want to share, and this is something that I typically kind of bring up in panels, but with these trainings, I think that a lot of the times there's a tendency to almost approach us as though we are one unit, and that every single individual that's part of the LGBTQ community is going to need the same resources, is going to need the same access to care. And I think that it's important to still remember that we are all individuals. I mean, we're human first. And just like every other person living on this world, we all have different needs and we all have different things that resonate with us and that we need to feel complete. And so I think these trainings are amazing and they give you a little bit more of like a factual, concrete background on things, but you still have to remember to approach everyone as an individual. And when you are helping people, just remember, take the time to get to know them, take the time to understand what they might need so that you can direct them to the proper resources. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to just follow up on both of those things. You I mentioned empathy before several times. Um, Keep in mind with regard to empathy and with regard to treating people as people, um, understand that we know everybody's had trauma in their lives, and despite all the gains that the LGBTQ legitimate community has made over the decades, and that's a lot. We're seeing a massive backlash, a very, very frightening backlash. Um, yeah, but it's horrible, and it, we're on edge. We're really on edge, and so be kind. Um, be kind. That's all I can say right now.
Thank y'all for adding some great perspectives to the panel and how, we can continue to support, our community as individuals, like each of you mentioned, and, really tailoring those resources and offering that empathy, I think are something that are so crucial, especially, when you're keeping this training in mind. So maybe that might give you all some food for thought, or if you need any follow-up questions or have any follow-up questions, we'd love to take them. Again, we have about half an hour of your time together left, and I want to make sure that we're making this as meaningful as possible so that we get any needs that you'll have addressed. But feel free to throw them in the chat, and we can also take questions from those of y'all who would like to unmute yourselves. I did just see that Lauren shared a great resource in the chat for providers. So thank you, Lauren, for doing that. That's really great.
I know that folks have already shared like some local resources in the chat so far. Are there any other like agencies, partners, anyone that you would recommend working with in the community? Because it seems like folks are wanting like or open to like on the ground training, virtual trainings, like any kind of resources. So
Yeah.
just wanting to know like if, and I know you all like provide a lot as well. So if there's any plugs that you want to do, yeah, would be happy to hear those.
Yeah, absolutely. I can share a little bit more about what we do within Kaminar's LGBTQ plus programming, and then panelists, if y'all would like to share anything related to any resources that maybe you would like to see or something that you utilize yourselves, feel free to jump in. But like I said, well, most of our panelists here, all of our panels here are volunteers with the LGBTQ plus Youth Spaces Speakers Bureau. And the youth space is really unique because not only do we serve, youth 13 to 25, but we also have adult programming for folks 18 plus, 18 till end of life, really. And we offer a plethora of different resources and trainings, and we connect a lot with some organizations in the community, which I'll tell you all about. But what we specialize in with the youth space and with our wellness program is we do offer similar SOGI trainings to what I'm sure you'll have experienced here. We host groups for both our adult and our youth programs where they can build community, where they can just, get any questions answered. And we also have an intimate partner violence prevention program that, is open to folks of all identities and all genders and all expressions, but we do specialize in LGBTQ plus lived experiences as well. And I believe we are one of, if not the only, I hope we're not the only, organization in that county that really specializes in prevention for LGBTQ plus folks. I know that there are violence prevention programs that occur with Next Door Solutions as well, that specializes in LGBTQ plus experiences. But with the youth space also, we offer, that volunteer opportunity here with the Speakers Bureau. And we offer tons of great connections that we partner with within the community with organizations like the Q Corner, which is a great organization that's funded through the county, and they offer similar things to the youth space and wellness. And it's kind of just another place for folks to find that community, to build that community and to, educate themselves on whatever they feel comfortable learning about. And then we also partner with the Office of LGBTQ plus Affairs, which I saw was thrown in the chat. Santa Clara County Office of Education, which was also in the chat, has great resources that tailor their needs to the LGBTQ plus youth. And I think those are the ones that I wanted to mention that we partner with specifically. But I don't want to take up too much of the time here because, again, I'm not a panelist. I'm just here to facilitate. Would any of our panelists like to throw in any perspectives that y'all have about any resources?
San Francisco, as an organization, I'm not terribly familiar with it. I tried it with not great results, honestly. It's called Homobiles. It's a volunteer organization that offers transportation, pay as you can. So anything to, I think, Wyckoff's point earlier, anything that could help people access these services is helpful. Also, and again, I'm also not terribly familiar with what Santa Clara County offers, but anything that we can do around mental health and support is critical, in my estimation.
I did throw in a list of Kaminar's LGBTQ plus programs if y'all want to get a snapshot of what I mentioned. But I did hear one of our panelists unmute themselves. I think it was Naomi.
Yes. So when I did my pageant for Miss International Queen, they're actually hosted by the Be the Transformational Change organization. And they are an organization that's geared towards helping, especially like more so trans women with employment, housing, access to healthcare, different things. And I know that they did just recently open up a volunteer program as well. So they're great to, if you want to donate or do your some volunteering time. Like they do give a lot back to trans women and helping us with our opportunities in life. So
I also want to plug, our Speakers Bureau as a resource too. If you if you or someone feels like there is a group, or even no matter how big or how small, that can benefit from, really hearing those lived experiences, we can list resources all day and, host those workshops. But I think I can speak for all of our panelists when I think that, you know, hearing from those lived experiences is really one of the most powerful tools that we do have when we are, you know, practicing that empathy, like Jason mentioned, tailoring those needs, like Naomi and Shreya and Wyckoff all mentioned. So again, hosting a Speakers Bureau panel is free. We really only need 2 weeks in advance, and we can coordinate a great group of folks. And I think that's all that I wanted to mention. But yes, we'll speak to really anyone who will listen, long story short. If there are no more questions about the SOGI training, I mean, I'm happy to open up the space for some fun, silly questions if y'all just want to get to know the folks in the room better. I think that could also speak a little bit to some of the experiences that we've had as folks within the community as well. So feel free to shout them out. You know, we're here to have that conversation with y'all. I can take it
I
from here. Oh,
do.
Joy,
Oh,
go
sorry.
for it.
Yeah, I did have a question, but I also am like mindful of the chat and the mute buttons, just to see if anyone is trying to speak. But it doesn't look like they are. I guess like just as like folks have mentioned before, like being in a period of like very just kidding. Chris has a question.
Great question, Chris. I think that this is not only a fun one, but one that could really also, you know, maybe add to that resource list. I see Wyckoff jumping for joy. So Wyckoff, if you want to start off with this one, I'll hand it to you. But we have a question in the chat that asks, is there any media that you all have been obsessed with lately and would recommend? Bonus if it's LGBTQ plus.
Okay, so this is I'm always obsessed with media that I grew up with. Classic is Undertale and Deltarune. That's actually how I kind of got into the relationship with my girlfriend. So that's, to me, it's a queer media. To other people, maybe it's not, but maybe you're just not looking at it hard enough. But I love those video games. I love YouTube playthroughs of video games like that. And for like actual like show media, I've been obsessed with it's this show from like before I was born called Prison Break. This is I'm about to like go on like a 1 minute ramble. I'll restrain myself. But it has LGBTQ themes. It's not the greatest LGBTQ themes, but the characters are really attractive and they're really like fun, and it's I've been watching it with my mom, and it's brought us closer together over like she's like, hey, that's not a good thing to say about gay people. And I'm like, yes, it's not. So it's really it's like educational. I also have been really recently into any production by Glitch, like on YouTube. If you've heard of The Amazing Digital Circus, or the new it's like Guinevere and something. I'm not good with names, and I just be consuming media left and right. But yeah, I'm also really into anime. That I feel like that's a surprise, but there's a great amount of queer anime and manga out there. If you ever want to read any, there's like some of it's like has problematic themes, but then some of it's like actually like okay, queer media written by queer people, which is good. If you guys want recommendations, I will look in my manga list right now and I will type them in chat later. But I don't know. I like to watch TV. I'm a big TV nerd. I'm always watching TV. But yeah, love you.
Go for it, Naomi.
So I plug this one every single panel, but it's La Veneno from HBO. That show had like changed my life. Granted, it's very mature themes, but the way that these trans women are depicted is so beautiful. I think that in history with like trans media, a lot of the times there was this like running narrative that when a trans woman would disclose herself or would show like her body, a lot of the times in movies they would write that the male actors would vomit or that there would be a negative response to learning that the woman was trans. You can see this in movies like Ace Ventura when he finds out, or like in the Pink Panther. There's just certain scenes where they will vomit almost out of disgust that this person is trans. La Veneno shows these women in their full form with just such beauty, such strength, that it really influenced me to create representation and to get out there. And that was a huge show that like changed my life. So if you can watch it, for sure.
I was gonna also mention a couple things that I'm usually late to the game with stuff like this. I've got other things on my mind and pursuits, but Sex Education on Netflix was amazing because it tackles all of this and around also around mental health and all of it. It's really good. And Pose was great as well.
Yeah.
Pose was stunning. It really floored me. So certainly a lot more mainstream, but also super good. And there's a lot of queer music out there, I mean, so much good queer music. Um, I don't know where to begin. You could just search. There's plenty of great playlists to introduce yourself to it, and it runs the gamut from, well, it just runs the gamut. Great.
For me, I love a good historical romance, and there was this YA novel I read recently. It's called Last Night at the Telegraph Club, and I thought it was cool because it's actually set in San Francisco. And it's about this lesbian couple during the Red Scare. And yeah, I think it's set in Chinatown of San Francisco. That's a good read. But I try and, you know, read a lot of queer books because especially I think it helps connect to like some of these authors that were living during a time where they were, literally fighting for their ability to be seen and just how far we've come. But it really kind of puts me back in that mindset of being able to see perspective as well. Um, there's also this book, it's called Stone Butch Blues, and it's by Leslie. It's I'll look up the author. But that's kind of set in it's by Leslie Feinberg, and it's actually an autobiography, and it's pretty heavy. Like I think it starts out with like a love note from her to one of her previous lovers, and she was kind of like shunned from her, family and sort of like found solace in this queer community. And that was also a time where they were fighting for workers' rights, and women were kind of like working and in factories and things like that. And it was about butch women and how they were kind of seen as like not women or not men either, and kind of like discredited from both. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective to get as a woman that's very feminine, to kind of understand like multiple perspectives of, queer or lesbian women. So yeah, both of those were very great reads for me.
I'm a big reality TV person, and as a drag performer myself, I'm a big RuPaul's Drag Race fan. Um, I don't know, maybe you'll see me on screen one day and you could say, I took a training with Justin, I know him. We'll see, we'll see. But yeah, all great recommendations from everyone on the panel. And just going back to what Jason said, Pose is one of my favorite scripted shows too. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I see a question in the chat, but feel free to keep them coming. We're getting to all of them. What would y'all like to encourage folks to keep in mind or practice in addition to empathy in order to support the community members and show up as an ally? Naomi, go for it.
I think that being an ally goes further than just if you really want to be an ally, I think it goes further than just like listening to what people have to say or like doing these trainings. I think taking the time to, out of your own personal time, educate yourself outside of somebody else doing that. I think if you can read up on things on your own, or if you can watch movies or shows or the things that we just kind of spoke about that are queer related medias, I think being able to immerse yourself in that culture as well, so that when you do meet a trans or LGBT person, you have things that you can talk about, and it shows that you actually have taken the time to inform yourself about our lived experiences versus just always waiting on like one of us to tell you. You're taking that initiative to really educate yourself.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, 100%, we're happy to help, but we all need to do our own work as well. The first word that came to mind was strength and conviction words, strength and conviction. So it's easy to participate in these things and listen and talk about it, but it's harder to stand outside a men's bathroom. And I present pretty straight white male, and this just happened. Harder to stand outside a men's room where another guy comes up and wants to use it, but you're standing outside saying, no, there's somebody in there who needs privacy. And they come back with, but there are multiple stalls and da da da. Yeah. And, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait. And I actually started to move back, and I was like, no, like that's weirdly hard. So be there. This is getting more and more and more critical. So yeah, I mean, walk it as well, right?
Jason, that was really good. That was really good. That's really important, especially like also I've noticed since I'm since I'm a kid, I've noticed that there are like teachers in my schools who often, or like just adults, like trusted adults, classic, where someone will say something, like a kid will say something, and you'll kind of make eye contact with that trusted adult, and the trusted adult will kind of like look away and just be like, sorry, I didn't hear that, I'm looking away. And it's like one of those things where it's like, hey friend, you're supposed to be here to help me. And I like, it's really hard to advocate for yourself, especially as like a baby queer person, or when you're just new to the community, or even it's just hard to advocate for yourself, period. And I mean, it's not, of course, other people's responsibility to protect the queer community, but it's like it's like consistency, it's kindness. It's if you hear someone saying something that's like actively rude and hurtful, it's always a great practice to be like, hey, I actually don't stand for that. That's you are not in a safe space to say that right now. That's one of the things that I've been practicing with, especially my parents. Since sometimes my dad will say something that's just like, whoa, that's out of nowhere. And my mom and I have been joining together, and she's like, I guess you're going to stick with this queer thing forever. So I guess I'd better be a good mom. So she's like, hey, it's not a safe space for that. And then he'll be like, okay. And then he'll like leave and quit it, which is great. But also there's one thing I want to touch on is consistency. I can kind of tell when people are like, oh, what are your pronouns? I ask everyone. And they don't really ask everyone. It just because they can kind of tell that I have a vibe coming from me, which is really sweet. And I like that. But in certain settings, it can kind of be like, oh, I've clocked you. And then it makes everyone feel like kind of uncomfortable of like, oh, you didn't ask me my pronouns. What's up with that person? So it's like if you want to ask people their pronouns, it would be a great practice to start putting like they them instead of any gendered pronoun. It's really hard at first, but it gets really easy really quickly. I've gotten my mom to do it, and she's 55 and she's very Republican classically, but she's like, this is actually easier than remembering everyone's genders. That was hard. But yeah, it's one of those things of like consistency and consistent advocacy and kindness. Yeah. Empathy,
I think for me, just being able to customize the resources you're offering right now to whatever is going on politically, and just being able to adapt. We're all kind of on edge right now because I guess our existence is a little politicized, and it's a little bit scary being a queer person and thinking about what rights you may or may not have, like in the future, or just like seeing these initiatives happen. But just even right now, with trans people being banned from the military, if there are people that were based in the Bay Area, how can we help them with, housing or whatever resources they need, etc. But also, I think there's a lot of queer people that aren't necessarily going to go and seek out resources for queer people, or maybe they don't join, community groups or identity groups at their school or workplace or anything. And I think it's going to be especially hard to reach those people. It's a lot of work to be out and proud, and a lot of the time people find it, like, even I feel this in my everyday life, where it's easier to kind of, especially because people assume I'm straight, or whatever. It's easier just to not out yourself all the time, and I don't blame people for that. But just even kind of thinking about making a statement that's welcoming, even if you don't think the person is going to fall into that group, can be a really powerful move, because you are, extending yourself. And, whether that person chooses to take the resource or not, just like being able to offer it to everyone is very helpful. And then also, I would say, especially to those folks, like, a lot of the time, queer people are asked to answer for like all of these issues that are really politicized, like, sports or bathrooms, when like that's like probably 1 or 2% of our lives in total. And it's also both encompassing gender and sexuality, which, like, the bathrooms thing, like, I mean, who my partner is isn't really going to affect me as like a queer woman, because I'm not transgender, and it's not going to affect some trans people either, like based on whether they, feel comfortable or not. And so I think it's really kind when people go out of their way to, you know, put these things into their constitutions and like everything like that. But I think just like not necessarily making every queer person like answer for those things, whether that's like asking them about things in the media or like these politicized issues, or just assuming that they need particular accommodations, just like kind of let them like offer, or ask them what they need, but like don't necessarily assume, I think can be really helpful. And that really goes back to what Naomi was saying about disaggregating this whole umbrella of the LGBTQ plus folks. I think it's very helpful in terms of supporting each other and giving each other resources and all of these things. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize that we all need different things too. And yeah.
Thank you, panelists. If there are no last burning questions, I think that is actually a great note for us to start wrapping up on. But I do want to be mindful that we do have a few more minutes left. So if any of y'all have been holding on to a last question, I will hold the space for you to throw it in there before I kind of give our closing statements. All right, I'm not seeing anyone unmute themselves, so I will take that as a sign. But again, thank you all so much for letting us join your training today, and for letting us, be those voices to just give you a small snapshot into some of the lived experiences that we have, some of the resources and the recommendations that we can offer from our own perspectives. Again, my name's Justin. I'm the program coordinator for the U Spaces Speakers Bureau. If you or someone is interested in becoming a panelist and doing something like this, we are open to all volunteers 13 and older. You don't need any speaking experience. All that you need to do is shoot me an email, and I can put my contact in the chat. But yeah, there's no speaking experience required. All you need to do to become a panelist is schedule some time with me to give you the rundown of how it goes. And we're also in a great place right now where that we are funded through a wonderful grant that's allowing us to also compensate our volunteers for their time. So if that's something that's of interest to you, give me a little message. But also want to plug again that if you are someone you know is also interested in hosting a panel like this, we're always taking requests, and we have a great roster of folks in addition to these wonderful panelists that join me here today. But yeah, with that being said, y'all can join me in giving our virtual panelists a virtual round of applause. Again, joining me today, I had Shreya, I had Naomi, I had Wyckoff, and I had Jason. So thank you all so much for joining us. I'll hand it over to Joy if you want to give any last closing statements before we wrap up.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you all for coming and sharing your experiences. Really super appreciative of you just spending time with us and chatting today. So thanks, folks, for being here. And just a few points of wrapping up on my end. I plugged the home-based team email in the chat, so if there are any follow-up questions or requests from this meeting, you can feel free to take that down, and a member of our team will be happy to help you with it. I see Justin also put his information in the chat, so if you want to reach out, please feel free. And I think the only other things were that we do send out feedback surveys after our training offerings. So you can keep an eye out for that. I believe that will be coming in your email. And you'll also receive a recording of this session as well. But other than that, thank you so much everyone for coming today. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you soon in our next training. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.